All right, here we go on our first side quest adventure regarding the great question of separation in Alberta. And we are going to take it right back to the beginning. Today's side quest is about Alberta's natal chart. We are going to do a mini series where I go through the entire chart. So today we're focused on House 1 and House 2 and the Cancerian energy that resides there, as well as the lessons that we can see are being called upon and some of the shadowy spaces that we have as a province. Once we've gone through that entire chart, then we're going to start looking at the different aspects. And that's going to help us understand the evolution of the chart. After that, the next series will be our progressed chart series so that we can see where the actual tangible evolution has been, where it's brought us, and where the patterns are suggesting we're headed. Astrology in and of itself isn't actually that predictive, but it is very patterned. We, as a result of recognizing and learning those patterns, are able to create predictions out of it. They're still just predictions though. So if we don't interpret it right, we are not going to get the right answer. And that's why it's very important to learn about all the different rules surrounding the different ways to read astrology. So this is a Placidus chart. This is not a whole sign house chart. I like whole sign house because it gives kind of an overview as a skating coach. Sometimes I like to just go up and watch hockey players play and just see what they do on the ice in terms of their game time, just to see what that overall view looks like. And that is really what the whole sign house does for us. It kind of gives us the general overall view where we can see how everything is sort of interacting. When we get into what this is called a Placidus chart, this is based around the time. So your whole sign house does not need the time of your birth, but a Placidus chart does, because now we're focusing it into that specific individual or entity, based strictly on when they entered the world, not just when the start of that day happened. So different ways to look at it. That's why with whole sign housing, generally it's one sign per house, but in Placidus, like you see here with Alberta's first and second house, it's split between Cancer. It means that that house was transiting through that sign at the time that Alberta came into existence. That is going to feed energy in different ways. So it's really important when you're watching an astrologer to try to recognize what system they're using so that you can double check whether they're actually following the rules for that system. Astrology has sort of a basic overall structure. The signs are the signs, they move how the planets are the planets, everything moves how they move, and they interact how they interact, and we have recognized the patterning of that. They don't change. But our ability to look based on the system, that can give us, like if I need an electional chart, right? That's a very different system than this, not the same system. So the overall rules are going to be the same. The signs are the signs, the houses are the houses, the planets are the planets, and the transits are the transits. The sun will always be where the sun is in our lifetime. That's not changing. But the system work is where we see some changes. So full disclosure, I've only been studying astrology for 5 years, so I'm still a baby, but I do use the Western tropical Placidus system. So those are the rules that we will be following. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about Alberta's first and second house, because this is where we have a lot of themes that start to pressure up later on in the progressed chart. So here we go. Alberta's chart has its rising sign in Cancer. So our first house, that house is all about how we project our identity out to the world around us. This is how I want people to view me. When you have a Cancerian energy, you want to be viewed as neighborly, as nurturing. You want to be known as intuitive, that I just got the inside beat on things. I know. Cancerian energy is all about emotional expression. It's about the changeability because it's the sign of the crab. So it can go from land to sea. It can go from shallow to deep. However, they're pretty light creatures, so they can get tossed around a little bit as a result of that emotionality. You ever seen a crab in real life? They can be really angry. They're really aggressive. And that Cancerian sign can be an aggressive sign. So when we talk about Cancer being in the first house, and yes, we do have it with Neptune in there, and we're going to talk about that as well a little bit later on though. But when we have Cancer in that first house, that sense of core identity is that we pride ourselves on being the space that takes care of our people. We want to have abundance in all ways. And so we want to come across as this space that is very nurturing and very inclusive. However, let's talk about the shadow side. And this is what a lot of what I feel that we're seeing in Alberta right now. When that crab gets all triggered in its anger, it gets pretty darn stubborn. And there is a lot of anxiety that happens with that sign as a result of the crab, and this is where that Neptune placement kind of comes into play. Crabs don't move directly forward or directly back. They are a side-to-side creature. So they're always a little stuck in the past, and they always have a little anxiety about the future while they're trying to navigate the now. The problem with the now for crabs in astrology is that crabs, being a very lightweight creature, can just be taken with the current, and they can be yeeted really far out. They're strong, but they're also fragile. So they want this strength and this nurturing and this ability to, see both sides, the protection of the home front, the stubbornness of the I'm not compromising my values, with this changeability that because we have Neptune in there, it's very nebulous. We have a really hard time deciding as a province exactly what direction we want to go. Again, we're always kind of moving backwards, never 100% moving forwards. It's a side to side, looking back, not really being sure about the future. We also tend to put a lot of security as a result of this placement surrounding our home. Our sense of security in life surrounds our home front, and that has to do with that second house placement. But in the first house, when we have that type of a placement in there, we really tend to attribute our sense of value of who we are on how we feel. The problem with that, and this is a Cancerian shadow side, is feelings pass, choices last. Cancerian energy, when it gets into that stubborn crabby crab space, it can cause damage. It can pinch a little too hard. Crabs can take off digits of people's fingers. It can get a little on the emotional, maladaptive side, especially when it feels that its material space is being threatened. So moving forward, sorry, I just have all my notes. I don't want to lose. So the lessons surrounding that placement has a lot to do with learning to be flexible within daily routines. It's learning to be flexible within non-idealistic situations. And it's about taking bold steps to question whether or not the traditional structures that we've been functioning in actually serve us. AKA, should we stay or should we go? That's where we're at. All right, so that's your first house for Cancer. Now let's talk about Neptune. So we got Neptune coming in there, sitting at pretty early degrees, at 9 degrees. So we're still just in the first decan, coming out of the first decan into the second decan. We're going to talk about that later on in the series because that's important. And when we talk about the layers of astrology, this is why I'm doing the series. We need to be responsible in these conversations, and I'm not seeing that happen in so many different spaces. So Neptune is coming out of that last decan. which means that there's something new, or not something new. We've started something new, and now we need to get some directionality with that, because it wasn't very, Neptune is very nebulous. It wasn't very defined or established. So Neptune in the first has huge influence over Alberta's chart for a lot of different reasons that we'll get into. But essentially, Neptune is associated with mysticism, intuition, creativity, spiritual development, and lessons. But it's also about the dissolution of structure. It's not like Uranus, where Uranus just comes in and is like an earthquake in your life. Neptune just slowly it's the thread that you just start to pull, and then all of a sudden you have no sweater left, but you do have a whole ball of yarn, so you could make a new sweater if you really wanted to. Or maybe we'll do mittens this time. That's Neptune. Okay. So it's a very hands-on sign. It's very emotional. It can be very protective when it is sitting with Cancer. The placement with Cancerian energy indicates that, yeah, we are a very sensitive and emotionally natured space. Cancerian energy is very nurturing and motherly, but it also has that mama bear thing. And as Albertans, we can be a little aggressive. We're talking about completely like splitting up an entire country. That's how aggressive we can be, because we're butthurt and mad. And in some ways it is justified. But when we tantrum, we frickin' tantrum. And it has to do with that Cancerian energy between the first and the second. So with Neptune in that first house, there's a lot of deep emotions and imagination that are very tied to the inner world. And remember that inner world for us, for Albertans, is the stability, and the feeling of that is very tied to our external resourcing. We're going to talk about that in that second house. But because we're so intensely affected by our external world, we tend to want to just go with instinct, and we just want to protect the things that are around us. But we can be it's the tides grabbing that crab and yeeting it, and we feel victimized as a result of that. We also have the ability to really be inspirational, and I think that we've seen that a lot in Alberta's resourcing, that we do feel that we can be industry leaders. But again, we tend to put all our eggs into one basket when we do stuff like that, and that's part of what this is. All right, but back to Neptune. A lot of the lesson in that is that we need to encourage individual focus on spiritual development, not just external senses of safety. So there's a great potential for expression of self and to inspire the world around us. But it needs Saturn's boundaries. It needs a more focused and matured emotional and spiritual sense of self. So it's important that people that have a placement like that we maintain connection to the reality of how things and stuff work, and move more towards practical steps, not emotional steps. Feelings pass, choices last. And so we need to be aware that we have this very sensitive space. All right, moving on. We want to talk about now, we have Venus in the second house with Cancer. We're going to talk a little bit more about the relationship between Venus and Cancer, some of the pitfalls with it. But just in general, when we talk about Venus being in Cancer, we're talking about, again, a lot of emotions, a lot of protectiveness, a lot of energies related to emotional stability as a result of external structuring. But when, again, that external space becomes destabilized, so does Alberta. There's a lot of very deep emotional bonds that happen with this type of a placement. But again, it can be really like overly protective as a result of that second house value structure. So your second house is all about how you experience your sense of value, how your external world influences your sense of value. Are you a material-based person? Do you tend to be a little bit more inner-driven, right? Do you find value, like, do you have a lot of Aries energy in that house? And so you find value in doing a lot of new things all the time and having new adventures all the time that are revolving around your material possessions or just your sense of value. It can be inner or outer. Typically tends to be outer in the second house because, again, it talks over to the 8th house, which is other people's possessions and resourcing. So that's the external, and along with other things, health and transformation and all sorts of stuff. But one of the themes is that other people's resourcing. And the second house and the 8th house talk directly to each other regarding that. So that's why the second house tends to be a little bit more on that material driven side. And then when you have Venus in there, because Venus is Venus and likes pretty things and just wants to feel all like love and happiness and joy. What is that show with Eva Longoria, right? She is, like, to me, the epitome of Venus, right? Like, they're in Disneyland in one of the scenes, and she decided to wear high heels, and her husband is like, yeah, no. And he could see that she was in a lot of pain, so he went and bought her these, like, Minnie Mouse slippers, and she puts them on. She's like, at first she's horrified because they look ugly to her, right? Like, aesthetically, that is what Venus is all about. Like, that does not match her outfit. But then she puts it on and the comfort, she's like, oh, they're so soft and plushy. So the internal comfort then at that point counteracted the external aesthetic, and it became more about the comfortability of her in that moment, not the aesthetic. When we talk about Venus in Cancer, that is usually the dynamic that I tend to see a lot of, is what we have for aesthetic desire versus the need for emotional stability. And are we using our aesthetics to create this? And in Alberta's chart, and we're going to talk about why this is in other videos, we got to go step by step. In Alberta's chart, that is the theme on this one. We have to make sure, the lesson in that is that our emotional experience doesn't become imbalanced when our financial space, when our material space isn't really validating the effort and the work that we put in. So it's a lot about financial issues and not being materialistic and not driving value from an external space, but driving it from that internal space. So why do we share that sign for Alberta? If we look at astrology from we came here to learn lesson space, it's pretty obvious that we need to talk about how we use our resourcing to give us a sense of value and safety and structure. And that when we don't have that, we then stagnate in that first house and become very stubborn and crabby in the not good way. And then we feel like we're victimized as a result of not having that second house stability from an externalized space. That's the current grabbing the crab and yeeting it. Okay? So that is our first and second house. Moving on. All right, I do want to talk really, really quick before we end this. We're almost at the end of this, just for this particular series, but I do want to talk really, really quick about this Venus and where it sits regarding the moon. There is a sextile there. So when we talk about the lessons of our houses, with that orb being at 2.78, it brings a really positive influence for emotional stability. We actually can bring in a lot of harmony and balance if we use the moon to kind of calm this portion of ourselves down. And again, remembering that our things and our stuff is not who we are. It can add beauty to our life, which Venus is there, so utilize that. But be realistic within that. And make sure that within those realistic conversations, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, that there is emotional maturation happening within the expression of our value. So we've always kind of struggled with putting our resources in a very influential space and attaching our sense of safety, security, and internal value as a province to those external resources. It's almost like astrology knows what it's talking about. So that's the start of it. There we are. We're at the very start of our first and second house side questy thing. We're going to talk a little bit in the next one, a little bit about the orbs, but that's another rule that needs to be introduced later on. We're just going to continue to go through the houses and talk about how the different signs and planets are influencing that house. So I'll see you in the next one where we tackle the third and the fourth. The fourth house has a stellium. All the things. And we're just going to keep peeling back the layers. Thank you for coming on my side quest with me. I hope that that was informative and that you learned something from it. All right, talk to you later.